I never thought I would become the guy who lets someone's house freeze solid. But when you deal with HOA board president Brenda Morrison for long enough, you start to see things differently. My name is Blake Ingram, and I have been running a heating and cooling repair business in Boulder, Colorado for the past 15 years. When you work in HVAC during a Colorado winter, you learn pretty quickly that timing is everything. A broken furnace in July is an inconvenience. A broken furnace in January, when temperatures drop to negative 15 degrees, can be a life or death situation. That is exactly why I take emergency calls seriously, why I keep my work van stocked and ready to roll at any hour, and why I absolutely cannot stand when someone gets in the way of me doing my job. The Pine Ridge Estates subdivision where this whole mess went down is one of those cookie-cutter neighborhoods built about 8 years ago on the outskirts of Boulder. Every house looks almost identical, with the same beige siding, the same dark brown trim, and the same perfectly manicured lawns that the HOA mandates must be kept between 2 and 3 inches in height during growing season. The streets are named after trees that were probably cut down to build the place, and the whole development has that artificial, sterile feeling that makes you wonder if actual human beings live there, or if it is just a movie set. I had been servicing HVAC systems in Pine Ridge Estates for years, and I knew the neighborhood well. Most of the residents were normal, friendly people who just wanted their heating and cooling to work properly. Then there was Brenda Morrison, the HOA board president, a 52-year-old woman with a platinum blonde bob haircut that looked like it required industrial-strength hairspray to maintain its rigid shape, and an attitude that suggested she believed the entire world should operate according to her personal specifications. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in mid-January. I got an emergency call at around 7 in the morning from Gerald Patterson, a nice retired teacher who lived on Maple Grove Lane in Pine Ridge Estates. His furnace had quit working sometime during the night, and his house was already down to 48 degrees. With the outside temperature sitting at negative 10 and expected to drop even further, this was serious. I told Gerald I would be there within 45 minutes, grabbed my equipment, and headed out. When I pulled onto Maple Grove Lane in my white repair van with my company logo on the side, I immediately spotted Gerald's house. He was standing in the doorway wearing a heavy coat and looking miserable. I started to pull into his driveway, but before I could complete the turn, a silver Mercedes SUV came out of nowhere and screeched to a stop, blocking the driveway entrance completely. Brenda Morrison climbed out of the Mercedes like she was making a grand entrance at a movie premiere. She wore a puffy white jacket that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, designer jeans, and boots that had never seen actual snow. Her face was set in that particular expression of righteous anger that certain middle-aged women perfect over years of practice. I rolled down my window. The cold air hit me immediately. "Excuse me, I need to get into this driveway. I have an emergency repair call." Brenda walked right up to my van, her boots crunching on the icy street. "I do not think so. You cannot park that commercial vehicle in a residential driveway in Pine Ridge Estates." I stared at her. "What are you talking about? I am here to fix this man's furnace. It is an emergency." Section 12. Paragraph 4 of the Pine Ridge Estates HOA covenant clearly states that no commercial vehicles may be parked in driveways or visible from the street for more than 30 minutes, Brenda said, reciting this insane rule like it was scripture. "Your van has commercial signage and therefore qualifies as a commercial vehicle." Gerald had walked down from his front door and was standing there shivering. "Brenda, for crying out loud, my furnace is broken. It is freezing in my house. He needs to fix it." Brenda turned to Gerald with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Gerald, we all have to follow the rules. That is what makes Pine Ridge Estates such a wonderful place to live. I am sure this repairman can park on the street and carry his equipment up the driveway. The HOA rules exist for a reason." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper under control. "Look, Mrs. Morrison, I have about 300 pounds of equipment and tools in this van that I need to diagnose and repair the furnace. I need to back the van up to the garage so I can access everything. This is an emergency situation." "The rules are the rules," Brenda said firmly. "If I make an exception for you, then I have to make exceptions for everyone, and then we might as well not have rules at all. You can park on the street. If your repair takes longer than 30 minutes with the van visible, I will have no choice but to issue a violation notice and fine to Mr. Patterson." Gerald looked like he was about to cry. "Brenda, please. It is -10 degrees outside." "I do not control the weather, Gerald," Brenda said. Then she looked at me. "Now please move your van so I can move my car. I have a very important HOA board meeting to prepare for." I wanted to argue more, but Gerald was standing there freezing, and every minute I wasted arguing with this woman was another minute his house got colder. I backed my van up and parked it on the street, watching as Brenda moved her Mercedes and drove away with a satisfied expression. It took me 4 trips walking up and down Gerald's driveway, carrying heavy equipment and tools through the bitter cold, to get everything I needed into his house. My back was already aching by the time I started the actual diagnostic work. The problem ended up being a failed ignition control module, which I had in stock. Under normal circumstances, this would have been a 90-minute job. But because I had to keep running back and forth to my van on the street to get different tools and parts, it stretched into nearly 3 hours. True to her word, Brenda drove by twice during the repair, both times slowing down to make a big show of looking at my van and checking her watch. The second time, she actually took a photo with her phone. When I finally got Gerald's furnace up and running, he was pathetically grateful. He paid my emergency service fee without complaint and apologized repeatedly for Brenda's behavior. "She has gotten worse over the past year," Gerald said as I was packing up. "Ever since she became HOA president, it is like she thinks she runs a small country instead of a subdivision. Last month, she cited Jennifer Chen 3 houses down because her Christmas wreath was the wrong shade of red. Said it clashed with the approved holiday decoration color palette." I shook my head. "That is insane." "You do not know the half of it," Gerald said. "But thank you for sticking it out and fixing my furnace. I really appreciate it." I drove away from Pine Ridge Estates that day thinking about Brenda Morrison and her ridiculous rules. I had dealt with difficult HOA boards before, but this was a new level of petty tyranny. Still, I figured that would be the end of it. I had no way of knowing that Brenda and I would have a much more serious confrontation just 3 days later, one that would change everything. Friday afternoon, I was in my shop doing maintenance on one of my backup vehicles when my phone rang. The number was from Pine Ridge Estates. I almost did not answer it, but business is business. "Blake Ingram HVAC," I said. "Hello, this is Brenda Morrison from Pine Ridge Estates." The voice on the other end said, "All business and no warmth. I need emergency furnace repair." I had to fight down the urge to laugh. "Is that so?" "Yes. My heating system has stopped working properly. The house is getting quite cold and I need someone to come fix it immediately." I thought about telling her to call someone else, but I am a professional. Besides, a small part of me was curious to see how this would play out. "What is your address?" She gave me an address on Oak Hill Drive, which I knew was one of the slightly larger homes in Pine Ridge Estates. I can be there in about an hour. Emergency service rate applies. Fine, fine. Just get here quickly, Brenda said and hung up. I loaded up my van and headed back to Pine Ridge Estates. The temperature had dropped again, settling in at around -12 degrees. The sky was that particular shade of gray that promised more snow. My weather app said we were supposed to get another 4 to 6 inches overnight, with temperatures plummeting to -20. When I pulled onto Oak Hill Drive and found Brenda's house, I immediately aimed for the driveway. Her silver Mercedes was parked in the 2-car garage, and there was plenty of room for my van. Before I could pull in, however, Brenda came running out of the house. "What are you doing?" she yelled, waving her arms. I stopped the van and rolled down my window. "I am pulling into your driveway so I can access my equipment and fix your furnace." "Absolutely not," Brenda said. "No commercial vehicles in the driveway. That is the rule." I sat there for a moment, genuinely unsure if she was serious. "You want me to park on the street to fix your furnace?" "The rules apply to everyone equally," Brenda said, crossing her arms. "I cannot very well enforce them on others if I do not follow them myself. That would be hypocritical." I started laughing. I could not help it. Here was this woman, standing in -12-degree weather, her own house getting colder by the minute, and she was more concerned about her ridiculous HOA rules than getting her heat fixed. "What is so funny?" Brenda demanded. "You are," I said, still chuckling. "You are literally freezing, you have an emergency, and you are worried about where I park my van." "Rules are rules," Brenda said stiffly. "Now are you going to fix my furnace or not?" Something snapped in me at that moment. I had spent 15 years dealing with difficult customers, unreasonable demands, and people who did not appreciate the work I did. But this woman, this petty tyrant who had made my job unnecessarily difficult just days ago, who was now demanding I make my own job harder even while helping her, represented everything I had grown tired of. "No," I said simply. Brenda blinked. "What did you say?" I said no. "I am not going to fix your furnace." Her face started turning red. "You cannot refuse service. That is discrimination." "Actually, I can refuse service for any reason that is not based on a protected class," I said calmly. "And being an unreasonable HOA president is not a protected class. You made it clear the other day that following your rules is more important than anything else. Well, my company has rules too. One of them is that I need to be able to park my work vehicle in a location that allows me to safely and efficiently do my job. Since you will not allow that, I cannot help you. I suggest you call another HVAC company." I started to back up my van. Brenda actually jumped in front of it, forcing me to stop. "You cannot just leave," she shrieked. "My furnace is broken. It is an emergency." "Then I guess you better let me park in your driveway," I said. Brenda's face was now fully red, and I could see the internal struggle happening. Her precious rules versus her immediate comfort. For a moment, I actually thought she might give in. "No," she finally said. "I will not be blackmailed in my own neighborhood. I will report you to every business review site on the internet. I will make sure everyone knows how you refuse to help someone in an emergency." "You do that," I said. "And I will make sure to include in my response that I offered to help, but you refuse to allow me to park in a location that would let me do my job safely. I am sure people will be very sympathetic." I drove around her and left. As I headed out of Pine Ridge Estates, I felt a mix of satisfaction and concern. The satisfaction was from finally standing up to a bully. The concern was about what would happen when the temperature really dropped and Brenda's house got truly cold. That concern faded as Friday evening came and went. Brenda had been unreasonable and ridiculous. She could call any of the dozen other HVAC companies in the Boulder area. It was not my problem anymore. Saturday morning, my phone started ringing at 6:30 in the morning. It was Gerald Patterson. "Blake, I am so sorry to bother you this early," Gerald said, "but I thought you should know what is happening. Brenda Morrison has been calling an emergency HOA meeting for this afternoon. She is telling everyone that you refuse to provide emergency service and that she is going to push for a rule banning your company from operating in Pine Ridge Estates." I rubbed my eyes, trying to wake up. She cannot do that. The HOA does not have authority over which contractors residents hire. "I know that and you know that, but Brenda does not care," Gerald said. "She is furious, and when she gets like this, she makes life miserable for everyone. I just wanted to warn you. Also, did you hear about the cold snap?" "What cold snap?" "Weather Service just issued an extreme cold warning. They are saying temperatures could drop to -30 tonight, maybe lower. It is going to be dangerous." After I hung up with Gerald, I checked the weather. He was right. A massive cold front was moving in, one of those polar vortex events that occasionally slammed Colorado. The news was already running stories about how people needed to stay inside, check on elderly neighbors, and make sure their heating systems were working properly. I thought about Brenda Morrison in her house with a broken furnace. Even if she was a terrible person, nobody deserved to freeze. I picked up my phone and called her number. She answered on the first ring. "What do you want?" "I saw the weather forecast," I said. "Mrs. Morrison, you need to get your furnace fixed before tonight. This cold snap is serious. If you do not have heat when it drops to -30, your pipes will freeze and burst. Your whole house could be destroyed." "I am well aware of that," Brenda said coldly. "I have been calling HVAC companies all morning. Nobody can come until Monday at the earliest. Apparently everyone is booked with emergencies." "I can come today," I said. "Just let me park in your driveway so I can do my job properly." There was a long silence. Then Brenda said, "I am not negotiating with you. You had your chance yesterday. If you want to help now, you can follow the same rules everyone else has to follow." "Those rules are insane," I said, my patience running out again. "You are going to freeze because you care more about where I park than about your own safety." "I have principles," Brenda said, "unlike some people." "Principles do not keep you warm," I shot back. "I would rather freeze than give in to someone trying to manipulate me," Brenda said, and hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, genuinely shocked. This woman was so committed to being right, so determined not to let anyone challenge her authority, that she was willing to risk her own home and safety. It was beyond stubborn. It was pathological. Saturday afternoon came and went. The temperature started dropping as the sun set. I kept checking my phone, half expecting Brenda to call back and beg for help. She never did. Around 8 in the evening, my phone rang again. It was not Brenda. It was a number I did not recognize. "Hello. Hi, is this Blake Ingram? The HVAC guy?" It was a woman's voice, younger than Brenda's. "Yes, this is Blake. My name is Stephanie Morrison. I am Brenda Morrison's daughter. I am calling because I have been trying to reach my mom all afternoon and she is not answering. I am worried about her, especially with this cold weather. I live in Denver, about an hour away. Do you know anything about what is going on?" I explained the situation as professionally as I could, leaving out some of the more inflammatory details, but making it clear that Brenda had a broken furnace and had refused to let me fix it because of HOA parking rules. Stephanie was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "That sounds exactly like my mother. She has always been like this. Rules matter more to her than people. I am going to drive out there right now and check on her. Thank you for telling me." The temperature kept dropping. By 10 that night, it was -18 and still falling. I was at home, warm and comfortable, but I could not stop thinking about what was happening at Brenda's house. Without heat, the temperature inside would be dropping steadily. Modern houses are insulated, which helps, but in these extreme conditions, that insulation only bought time. By morning, her house would be well below freezing. The pipes would freeze and burst. The damage would be catastrophic. I tried to tell myself it was not my problem. I had offered to help multiple times. Brenda had refused. What happened next was on her, not on me, but I could not quite make myself believe it. Yes, Brenda was unreasonable and obnoxious. Yes, she had made my job harder for no good reason. But did that mean she deserved to have her house destroyed? Did it mean I should just let it happen when I had the skills and equipment to prevent it? Around 11, my phone rang yet again. This time it was Stephanie Morrison. "Mr. Ingram, I am at my mother's house right now." She finally let me in after I stood outside banging on the door for 10 minutes. "It is absolutely freezing in here. I have a thermometer that says it is 42 degrees inside. My mother is wrapped in blankets and being completely stubborn. She refuses to leave and go to a hotel, and she refuses to let you come fix the furnace unless you park on the street. Can you please come and try to talk some sense into her?" I almost said no. Every instinct told me to stay out of this family drama. But Stephanie sounded desperate and scared, and I knew that by morning, 42 degrees would be 20 degrees or lower inside that house. "I will come over," I said, "but I am not promising anything." The drive to Pine Ridge Estates was eerie. The streets were completely empty. Nobody in their right mind was outside in this weather, unless they absolutely had to be. My van's thermometer showed -22 degrees when I pulled onto Oak Hill Drive. Stephanie met me at the door. She was in her late 20s, with dark hair and a much warmer demeanor than her mother. She looked scared and frustrated in equal measure. "Thank you so much for coming," she said. "She is in the living room. Maybe you can get through to her." Brenda was sitting in a recliner, wrapped in what looked like every blanket in the house. The air inside was painfully cold. I could see my breath. Brenda glared at me when I walked in. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "Your daughter called me," I said. "Mrs. Morrison, you need to be reasonable. Let me park in your driveway and fix your furnace. Otherwise your house is going to be destroyed by morning." "I will not be bullied," Brenda said, her teeth actually chattering. "You want me to violate the HOA rules that I am responsible for enforcing. If I do that, I lose all credibility. Everyone will think they can ignore the rules." "Mom, who cares?" Stephanie said. "This is an emergency. Nobody is going to blame you for letting a repairman park in the driveway during an emergency." "You do not understand," Brenda said. "I have worked hard to make Pine Ridge Estates a quality community. That means enforcing standards. If I start making exceptions, everything falls apart." I knelt down so I was at eye level with Brenda. "Mrs. Morrison, listen to me. In about 6 hours, the temperature inside this house is going to drop below freezing. When that happens, the water in your pipes is going to freeze and expand. The pipes will burst. When that happens, you will have water damage throughout your entire house. The repair costs will be tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more. Your insurance might not even cover it if they determine you refused reasonable repair service. Is that really worth it just to prove a point about parking rules?" Brenda looked at me with pure hatred in her eyes. "Get out of my house." Stephanie tried again. "Mom, please, just this once, be flexible." "No," Brenda said firmly. "I have made my decision. If Mr. Ingram wants to help, he can do it following the same rules everyone else has to follow. Otherwise, he can leave." I stood up, my knees aching from the cold and the kneeling. I looked at Stephanie. "I am sorry, I tried. You should take your mother to a hotel for the night." "She refuses to leave," Stephanie said, tears in her eyes. "She says that would be letting you win." I did not know what else to say. I had done everything I could. I left Brenda's house and drove home, the temperature gauge showing -25 degrees. Sunday morning, I woke up to my phone exploding with notifications. The temperature had bottomed out at -32 degrees overnight, the coldest temperature in Boulder in 15 years. The news was full of stories about frozen pipes, car problems, and overwhelmed emergency services. Mixed in with the weather alerts were text messages from Gerald Patterson and several other Pine Ridge Estates residents. They all said basically the same thing. Brenda's house had frozen solid overnight. Pipes had burst. Water was everywhere. It was a disaster. There were also 3 voicemails from Brenda Morrison, each one more frantic than the last. In the final one, she was crying. "Mr. Ingram, please call me back. My mother's house is destroyed. Pipes burst everywhere. There is ice and water throughout the whole house. She is finally willing to let you park in the driveway. Please, can you come fix the furnace so we can at least start the cleanup process?" I sat there listening to that message 3 times. Part of me, the angry part that remembered Brenda's stubbornness and rudeness, wanted to ignore it. She had brought this on herself. I had warned her. I had offered to help. She had refused, but the professional part of me, the part that took pride in my work and my reputation, knew I had to respond. I called Stephanie back. "I will come over," I said, "but I need to be clear about something. I can fix the furnace, but that is just the first step. Your mother needs water damage restoration, probably mold remediation, and a lot of repair work. It is going to be expensive and time-consuming." "I know," Stephanie said. "Just please come help." When I arrived at Brenda's house, it looked normal from the outside. Inside was a different story. Water had apparently started spraying from burst pipes around 4 in the morning. By the time Brenda had figured out where the main water shutoff was located, significant damage had occurred. The hardwood floors in the kitchen and dining room were warped and buckled. The drywall in multiple rooms was water-stained and would need to be replaced. Furniture was ruined, and everything was still bitterly cold. Brenda was sitting in the same recliner as the night before, still wrapped in blankets, but now she looked defeated rather than defiant. She would not make eye contact with me. I parked my van in the driveway. Nobody said a word about it. The furnace repair took about 2 hours. The problem was a faulty flame sensor, an easy fix under normal circumstances. Once I had the heat working again, the house slowly started warming up, but the damage was done. Stephanie paid my bill and walked me out to my van. "I am so sorry about all this," she said. "My mother can be impossible sometimes." "Is she going to be okay?" I asked. "Physically, yes. Financially and emotionally, I am not so sure. She has homeowner's insurance, but I do not know if they will cover this. She had the opportunity to prevent it and refused." "The insurance company might argue she was negligent." I nodded. "That is between her and them. I hope things work out." As I drove away from Oak Hill Drive, I expected to feel satisfaction. Brenda had been wrong, and now she was facing the consequences of her stubbornness. But instead, I just felt tired and sad. Nobody had won here. Brenda's house was ruined. She was probably facing financial disaster, and I had let it happen. The easy thing would have been to walk away and forget about it. But over the next few days, I could not stop thinking about what had happened. Yes, Brenda had been unreasonable. Yes, she had refused to listen to warnings. But I was the expert. I knew what would happen. I had let my anger at her behavior cloud my judgment. On Tuesday, I got a call from a lawyer named Robert Chen. He introduced himself as Brenda Morrison's attorney and asked if I would be willing to meet with him to discuss the incident. "What is there to discuss?" I asked. "Your client refused service. I documented everything. I even came back and tried to warn her about the danger. She refused to listen." "I understand that," Robert said, "but Mrs. Morrison is facing a very difficult situation. Her insurance company is denying her claim, citing negligence. She is looking at over $80,000 in repair costs that she will have to pay out of pocket. She has asked me to explore all her options, including whether she has any legal recourse against you." I felt my temper rising again. "Legal recourse against me?" I tried to help her. "She refused." "I know," Robert said, and his tone was actually sympathetic. "Between you and me, I think Mrs. Morrison made some very poor decisions. But she has hired me to represent her interests, so I need to do my due diligence. Would you be willing to meet so we can discuss what happened? Maybe there is a way to resolve this without litigation." I agreed to meet with Robert Chen at his office in downtown Boulder on Thursday afternoon. I brought all my documentation, phone records showing when Brenda had called me when I had called her, text messages, everything. Robert's office was in a modern building with a nice view of the Flatirons. He was a serious-looking man in his 40s with wire-rimmed glasses and a calm demeanor. He looked over all my documentation carefully. "This is very thorough," he said. "You clearly tried to help Mrs. Morrison multiple times. And you warned her about the consequences of not getting the furnace fixed. So why am I here?" I asked. Robert leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Morrison believes you should have done more. She thinks you should have called the police or social services, reported her as a vulnerable adult, something to force intervention." "She is not a vulnerable adult," I said. "She is a stubborn woman who made bad choices." "I agree," Robert said, "but Mrs. Morrison is desperate. The damage to her house is extensive. She might lose her home over this. She is looking for someone to blame, and right now, you are the most convenient target. So what do you want from me?" Robert folded his hands on his desk. "Honestly, I want you to understand Mrs. Morrison's perspective. She built her entire identity around being the HOA president, around enforcing rules and maintaining standards. When you refused to follow those rules, it felt like an attack on everything she stands for. She reacted emotionally rather than rationally. Now she is facing the consequences and she is looking for a way out." "That is not my problem," I said. "I know," Robert said, "and legally you are in the clear. You offered service. She refused under unreasonable conditions. You warned her about the consequences, and you even came back to try to help. No court would find you liable, but I wanted to meet with you to see if there was any willingness on your part to help find a solution." "What kind of solution?" "Mrs. Morrison is going to have to sell her house," Robert said. "The repair costs are too high, and without insurance coverage she cannot afford to fix it. She will probably take a significant loss. Her credit will be destroyed. She might have to file for bankruptcy. I am trying to help her negotiate with the insurance company, but it is not looking good." I sat there processing this information. Brenda Morrison had been horrible to me, had made my job harder for no reason, had refused help even when warned about the consequences. But hearing that she might lose everything, that her stubbornness might destroy her financially, I did not feel the vindication I expected to feel. "What do you want from me?" I asked again. "Would you be willing to write a statement for the insurance company?" Robert asked. Explaining the timeline, making it clear that Mrs. Morrison was under extreme stress, that the cold snap was an unusual event, that sort of thing. It might help her case. "You want me to help her after everything she did?" "I am asking you to be the bigger person," Robert said simply. I thought about it for a long moment. Then I said, "I will write the statement, but I want something in return." Robert raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I want Brenda Morrison to resign as HOA president and to issue a statement to all Pine Ridge Estates residents acknowledging that the commercial vehicle parking rule is unreasonable and needs to be changed. If she does that, I will write whatever statement you need for the insurance company." Robert actually smiled. "I think that can be arranged." 2 weeks later, I received an email from Gerald Patterson. Attached was a letter that had been sent to all Pine Ridge Estates residents. In it, Brenda Morrison announced her resignation as HOA president, citing personal issues. The letter also included a recommendation that the HOA board review and revise several rules, including the commercial vehicle parking restriction, to make them more reasonable and practical. Gerald's email said that the HOA board had voted unanimously to suspend the commercial vehicle rule pending a full review. Several residents had apparently been complaining about it for months, but Brenda had refused to consider any changes. I wrote my statement for the insurance company, explaining the timeline of events and emphasizing that the extreme cold snap was an unusual weather event that created an emergency situation. I did not lie or exaggerate, but I presented the facts in a way that was as favorable to Brenda as possible. I heard through Gerald that the insurance company eventually agreed to cover about 60% of the repair costs, which was enough for Brenda to afford the repairs without having to sell the house. She would still be paying off the deductible and uncovered expenses for years, but at least she would not lose everything. I never spoke to Brenda Morrison directly again. I continued to service HVAC systems in Pine Ridge Estates, and occasionally I would see her silver Mercedes driving through the neighborhood. We never acknowledged each other. The new HOA president was a retired engineer named Marcus Thompson, who had a much more practical approach to community management. One of his first acts was to formally revise the commercial vehicle parking rule to allow service vehicles to park in driveways while actively performing work. He even called me personally to apologize for the hassle I had been put through. About 6 months after the incident, I was servicing a furnace for a new resident in Pine Ridge Estates. The guy mentioned that he had bought the house from a woman who had served as HOA president. "She seemed really nice," he said, "but I got the sense she was eager to move on. She did not even try to negotiate much on the price." I just nodded and continued my work. I thought a lot about what had happened over the following months. The easy narrative was that Brenda Morrison was a terrible person who got what she deserved, but the truth was more complicated. She was someone who had invested her entire identity in a role, in being the person who enforced rules and maintained standards. When that identity was challenged, she could not separate her personal worth from her position as HOA president. She made catastrophically bad decisions to protect her ego, and those decisions nearly destroyed her financially. But I had made my own mistakes too. I had let my anger at her unreasonableness cloud my judgment. When I left her house that Saturday night, I knew what was going to happen. I knew her pipes would freeze and burst. I could have done more to prevent it. I could have called the police and explained the situation, asked them to do a welfare check. I could have contacted her daughter earlier. I could have showed up with my van on Sunday morning and just started fixing the furnace whether Brenda wanted me to or not. Instead, I had let my wounded pride dictate my actions. I had wanted Brenda to suffer consequences for her behavior, and she had, but those consequences were far worse than anything she deserved. The incident changed how I approach difficult customers. I still maintain professional boundaries, and I still refuse to work under genuinely unsafe conditions. But I try harder to separate the person from their behavior, to understand that sometimes people make bad decisions because they are scared or stressed or protecting something they think is important. I also became much more active in educating people about the dangers of extreme cold weather. I started offering free furnace safety checks before winter each year, and I worked with the city to develop an emergency response plan for future cold snaps. If I could use what happened with Brenda Morrison to prevent similar disasters, then maybe some good could come from it. One cold evening the following winter, almost exactly a year after the incident, I was finishing up a repair job in Pine Ridge Estates when I saw Brenda Morrison walking her dog. She looked older, more tired. I almost drove past without acknowledging her, but something made me stop. I rolled down my window. "Evening, Mrs. Morrison." She stopped and looked at me warily. "Mr. Ingram." "How are you doing?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I am managing. The house is repaired. I am no longer HOA president, which is probably for the best." She paused, then added, "I wanted to thank you for the statement you wrote to the insurance company. My lawyer said it helped." "You are welcome," I said. "I also wanted to apologize," Brenda continued, the words clearly difficult for her. "I was unreasonable. I put my pride ahead of common sense, and it nearly cost me everything. You tried to help me, and I refused to listen. I am sorry." I nodded. "I appreciate that, and I am sorry too. I could have handled things better. I let my frustration with the situation affect my judgment." Brenda gave a small, sad smile. "We both made mistakes, but thank you for being gracious about it." She walked away with her dog, and I drove home. That brief conversation did not erase what had happened, but it gave me a sense of closure that I had not realized I needed. The following spring, the Pine Ridge Estates HOA board invited me to attend one of their meetings to discuss HVAC maintenance and cold weather preparation. Marcus Thompson, the new president, wanted to make sure all residents understood the importance of maintaining their heating systems and having a plan for emergencies. I gave a presentation about furnace maintenance, warning signs of problems, and what to do in extreme cold situations. About 30 residents attended, including several board members. Brenda Morrison was not there, but I had not expected her to be. After the meeting, several residents came up to thank me and to schedule maintenance appointments. Gerald Patterson was there, and he pulled me aside. "You know, what happened with Brenda last year was the best thing that could have happened to this neighborhood," he said. "It forced everyone to take a hard look at our HOA rules and figure out what was actually important. We have gotten rid of a lot of the petty stuff and focused on things that actually matter, like safety and property maintenance. The whole community is better for it." I thought about that on my drive home. Maybe Gerald was right. Maybe sometimes it takes a disaster to force necessary change. Maybe Brenda's stubbornness and my anger and the frozen pipes and all the damage had served a purpose after all. But I also thought about the cost. Brenda Morrison had nearly lost everything because she could not admit she was wrong. I had stood by and let it happen because I wanted to prove a point. Those were not small mistakes or minor character flaws. They were serious failures of judgment that could have had even worse consequences. The truth was that nobody emerged from that situation as a hero. Brenda was stubborn and unreasonable. I was petty and vindictive. Stephanie Morrison and the other residents were caught in the middle of a conflict that should never have happened, but we had all survived it. Brenda had learned that being right was not as important as being safe. I had learned that being professional meant putting aside personal feelings to do what was right. And the community had learned that rules needed to serve people, not the other way around. As I pulled into my own driveway that evening, I thought about how different things could have gone. If Brenda had been just a little more flexible, if I had been just a little more persistent, if the weather had been just a little less extreme. Any of those factors could have changed the outcome completely, but we do not get to control all the factors. We only get to control our own choices and actions. And sometimes, even when we make the wrong choices, we get a second chance to make things right. I never forgot about Brenda Morrison and that freezing weekend in January. The story became something of a legend among HVAC technicians in the Boulder area, a cautionary tale about stubborn customers and the importance of clear communication. But for me, it was more than just a funny story or a warning. It was a reminder that behind every difficult interaction is a human being, someone with their own fears and insecurities and reasons for acting the way they do. That did not mean I had to accept unreasonable behavior or put myself in danger to help people who refuse to help themselves. But it did mean I needed to approach every situation with empathy and professionalism, even when the other person made it difficult. Years later, long after Brenda Morrison had moved away from Pine Ridge Estates and the incident had faded from most people's memories, I still thought about that weekend sometimes. I thought about standing in her freezing living room, watching her choose pride over safety. I thought about driving away knowing what would happen. I thought about the phone calls and the desperation and the moment when I had to decide whether to help someone who had treated me poorly. I would like to say I made all the right choices, that I handled everything perfectly. But that would be a lie. I made mistakes. I let my ego get in the way. I allowed a bad situation to become worse because I wanted to teach someone a lesson, but I also learned from those mistakes. I became a better technician, a better businessman, and hopefully a better person. And maybe that is the real lesson of the whole mess. We all make mistakes. We all let our pride or our anger or our stubbornness lead us astray sometimes. What matters is what we do afterward, how we learn and grow and try to do better next time. Brenda Morrison taught me that lesson, even though she probably never intended to. And for that, despite everything, I will always be grateful. The frozen house, the burst pipes, the ruined floors and walls, all of that damage was real and costly and painful. But it also created an opportunity for change, for growth, for becoming something better than we were before. That is worth something. Maybe not $80,000 worth of something, but worth something nonetheless. And in the end, maybe that is enough.